Hi, welcome to another video session with Agile Stationery. My name is Simon Gibbs. I'm a software engineer and the creative input at Agile Stationery. I just had an excellent conversation with another engineer and cybersecurity expert, Brett Crawley, author of Threat Modeling Gameplay with EoP. It's a really wide-ranging conversation where we covered how the book can help you support your gameplay with EoP, with trim, and with striped, so all the variations of the game that are available, and how this fits into your process and why it's so important. It was really good catching up engineer to engineer about this important topic. We see that cybersecurity continues to be really essential as part of your software delivery enterprise and is more and more becoming a necessity for the whole of society. So we're here with Brett Crawley, author of Threat Modeling Gameplay with EoP. Brett, why don't you start us off by talking a little bit about yourself? You've been working as an engineer since 1996, is that right?
Yes, and I've worked for a number of different companies. I started with Microsoft, then went to where I was as it was as an intern while I was a student doing a sandwich course. And I then went on my degree to work for Philips in their research labs. And throughout my career, I've mainly been a software engineer, developing lots of different types of applications from embedded systems right through to search engines. I developed an OS suite for the European Commission. And latterly, I've been working as an application security engineer for, in the last 10 years for a number of different companies, including where I am now, which is with Mimecast.
Was there a particular experience that led you to leave software engineering proper and sort of transition into cybersecurity?
I guess yes, there was. I started doing, or gradually I was moving more and more in the direction of developing security components. And in my previous employment, I was implementing all of the authentication and authorization parts of the system and the transport layer security. And
really low level stuff on the network.
Yeah. I was also concentrated on Kerberos, which is quite complex. And I found that all of the security aspect to my work was what lit me up, or
growing up in the morning.
Yeah, I found it more intellectually challenging. And so I gradually decided, right, I'm going to move in that direction. I moved towards being an application security engineer, and because I wanted to remain technical. And the risk is, as you advance in your career, people get dragged more and more towards being a manager as opposed to an individual contributor.
Absolutely. There's plenty of road down the IC track. I've swerved out of that recently myself. It's not easy, so well done. So you wrote the book, Threat Modeling Gameplay with EoP. What led you to sort of invest the time to write a book? What problem were you trying to solve? Whose problem were you trying to solve?
Okay. Well, I was working with a lot of teams doing threat modeling. And while I was working with those teams, there were product managers, and there were engineers, and lots of different people involved in the threat modeling. And when they'd read the description of a threat, they'd often say, well, can you give me an example? Because I'm not sure I really follow what it's getting at. So I was trying to give concrete examples and think of them on the spur of the moment, so to help them understand the problem without telling them where the problem was in their design.
Unless you can involve them in it, you're not getting that diversity of perspective, right, that you want from including all of the engineers. Exactly. And did you say product people to turn up to these sessions?
Yes.
I often get that, I think.
Well, I mean, you should really have people from who you should have an architect. You should have somebody who developed the front end, or will develop the front end. Somebody who will develop the back end, and a product person, so that you've got the different contexts and viewpoints of the problem. Because a product manager will have an understanding of the customer's needs or
Right.
the customer's behavior, whereas the engineer, the back-end engineer, maybe won't really understand or doesn't need to know everything that the front-end engineer will be dealing with. They only there's an area of overlap, obviously, but each one has their own context, and that brings that allows them to they might recognize different threats because of that context. So
What people know about a system is very implicit. Like, however well documented it
yeah,
is, most of the information that's available about the system is probably in someone's brain, not on a piece of paper or a wiki page.
yeah, and it's soliciting that information from them, and so we use Adam's game, Elevation of Privilege, to do that, and it also it forces them to be involved or to come out of their shell and actually participate in the threat modeling.
Are you comfortable with that? Being forced to get stuck in?
Sometimes people aren't very comfortable with it, but at the same time, if they have their turn, as opposed to doing this as a group who they all discuss, you'll find that strong characters will be the only ones talking. And if you're playing this as a game around the table, then people who might normally sort of sit back and let the others do the talking, they actually have a turn and they have to think of something to say. And often you find afterwards that, well, they actually quite enjoyed it.
Right.
They perhaps didn't want to participate at the start, but as things have progressed, they've got more involved. So,
Fantastic. Is there anyone sort of outside the workplace that you want to draw in? You mentioned students.
yes,
Why is students on your mind?
I think it was in 2021, Joe Biden created an official order requiring that people start to incorporate certain practices into their software development life cycle and their processes. And one of these is threat modeling. And we've also got an enormous skill gap in security. So I think there are currently 4 million open positions for security people, and there are only about 3.5 to 4 million people working in security. So
It's larger than the industry itself.
yes.
Wow.
And so students, if they choose this as a subject matter, one, they've almost got a guaranteed future, and two,
That's good.
this is something that they will probably have to cover in their course, and doing this as a game makes it more engaging for them. And at the same time, if they have this, I mean, this book is support material for playing the game and learning to threat model, and it's filled with examples of different threats, and some of the for each card in the game, you've got an example, at least one example, and it covers gives you reference material where you can go and read up further, and potential mitigations that you can put in place to protect your system against the threat that you've discovered.
A lot of EoP facilitators sort of push gently back on engineers in particular, saying, don't worry too much about mitigations. But you've included mitigations in the material, in the book. So can you explain? Because that feels like an apparent contradiction. So how do you want to use them? How do you want them to use that mitigations related material?
So when you talk about not pushing back on thinking in mitigations, it's if when you're doing the threat modeling, you're thinking, well, I've already thought I'll put HTTPS here, here, and here, so I don't need to include that. Well, your threat model should be a document showing that you've done your due diligence and you've thought about this aspect, and then later you can add the mitigation to the document saying, well, I'd already thought about this, but here's what I've done, what I've actually done to fix the problem. So the mitigations are something you should add after the fact. During the threat modeling, you should be looking for what the threats are, and then you should document how you've treated or
addressed each
threat.
Yeah.
So it's
but people using the book in the session as reference material to check their work during the game, or how are they using it? And when is the actual game happening? How does this relate to what's the relationship between the book and the software delivery process?
Okay, so threat modeling should be done as early as possible so that you are, because to give an example, if you build a house and you build it without a wall on the front, so there's no front door, there's no windows, there's nothing on the front of the house, but you've got the strongest locks possible and the strongest doors possible and the strongest windows on every other wall in the house. It doesn't matter how strong they are, somebody can just walk in the front door, or walk in the front of the house. So to fix that at a later point, you'd have to go back to the foundations, because you'd have to dig the foundations to put the wall in place, and you've got that sort of knitting along the where the sides of the house join to one another, and you're going to have to implement that after the fact.
Okay, some joint at some sort of weak point.
Yeah, and it's always going to be weaker. It's going to be difficult to implement. So the idea is, if you can fix a bad implementation, but you can't fix a bad design. So you want to get the design right up front. So you want to do the threat modeling as early as possible. That way you can build security in from the onset. And
I like the analogy. So to explore that a little bit more, if you think about looking at a house, right?
Yeah.
It's basically a box with ways in and out,
yeah.
right? And a house with no front seems ridiculous, because anyone could see, you could just walk in there, take a quick glance at the house. Like, okay, you might be in the back garden, but it's not going to take you long to discover it doesn't have a front, right?
Yeah.
But a piece of software isn't as immediately available to the senses.
Yeah.
So actually, be prompting people to think systemically about, okay, what does this actually need to be secure?
Yeah.
Is much harder for a piece of software than thinking about a house that needs to have four walls and doors.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a difficult proposition. Yeah.
And I mean, as I said about you can fix a bad implementation. An example of that would be, okay, so we were missing the wall, but let's say we put a secure door in, but the lock's broken. You can just take the lock out and put a new one in. If you didn't have where to put the lock in the first place, it's a bigger problem. If it's just the lock is broken, you can substitute.
I've done exactly that. I wouldn't be wanting to make that hole. So
Yeah.
I totally get your point. Yeah.
That's the sort of impetus for when you should be doing this, and it's just threat model as early as possible, and then the book is there to sort of support you in that, so that when you're playing the game, let's say you're playing the tampering hand of elevation of privilege,
Which is where we
you've got.
start, yeah.
And you've got, I don't know, card number 3 or card number 4 in your hand, and you read the threat description. You're like, what does that mean, though? You can just open the book to the page for tampering at card number 4, and you've got an example that, although might not be exactly what the problem is in your situation, it gives you an idea of what it might, how it might manifest itself, so you can then go, okay, it's not identical, but here in my system, we're doing more or less the same thing, and so you make a note of that, and then again you can use the book later to go, okay, I want to understand more about this particular threat, because it sounds quite interesting. So you go and look at the different references, which, I mean, there are references from MITRE, CAPEC, and CWE, and there's also OWASP ASVS references. For those who don't know, CAPEC is it's like a directory of different threats, and CWE is a directory of different weaknesses. And ASVS is it's a document for with lots of different characteristics that you should have implemented, or how you should be implementing things within your application. And it's the application security verification standard.
Right, we're all taking all the research that's referenced from the book is taking a unique spin, and again coming at it from a totally different perspective to actually give you a body of research that you can keep going down the rabbit hole as far as you want. But in multiple ways, and choose your own adventure.
Yes. Right. And as you get further on, and you've actually got your threat model completed, you can then start to, well, I mean, I say you've got your threat model completed. It's a living document. It should never be completed until your software goes out of production. But at the same time, once you've listed all of your threats, you can then say, okay, so for this threat, I've got this mitigation in place, but is that enough? And you can look at the other mitigations that were available, so that you can judge what residual risk you had, and perhaps improve it even further. You can also go through the different threats where you've got no mitigation, and you can say, okay, here it tells me if I do the X, Y, and Z, I'm in a better place. Doesn't mean you're perfect, but you're at least in a better place.
Okay, so you're gamifying. You can reference it before the game, reference it during the game, reference it after the game. I would say we recommend an online workflow through the Croupier tool. You can get at croupier.agilestationary.co.uk. And with that workflow, players know what cards that they've got to deal with well in advance of the game. It gives people a way to play remotely when they are, for example, locked down, when the pandemic lockdown that it was invented. But one of the major things that we wanted to encourage with that approach was actually giving people multiple touch points with the deck. So if they've got the multiple touch points with the deck, and they've got their randomly assigned cards that they need to play with during a game, and access to the book, well, they're never stuck, right? And I think that's sort of one of the advantages of having a book like this available, right? It actually sort of lowers the bar for people, so that they are much more able to participate. Is that something that you set out to do?
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the main objectives of the book, was to get more people, or to encourage more people and to facilitate more people being able to participate. So to get more people involved. And in the book, there's a gameplay chapter at the start which explains how you can go about playing the game, but it also discusses the approach or different approaches to play the game online. There's a link to Croupier in there. There's also a link to a Miro board for using in your session, where you can put your diagrams into the Miro board, and you've got a different, like, I guess you could call it board game for each of the suits in the game, so that you can put your sticky notes on of all of your threats into your Miro board, and then when you're done, you can add your mitigations later to that. And for the mitigations that you haven't already got in place, there's a Jira plugin for Miro, and you can create your tickets straight from Miro.
Slap it straight over to your main workflow system.
Yeah. And there's an article on Adam's site where I've actually explained all of that in the past, and there's also a link to the Miro board on there.
Okay, be sure to send that over to the show notes. Does the book only cover security?
No, it covers the privacy aspects of things as well. So there are a number of extensions to the Elevation of Privilege game. There's one which is a privacy suit, but then there's a trim extension, or elevation of privacy, and that contains there's a suit for transfer, so that's transfer of data when it's you're going across international boundaries. You've got retention and removal, that's for the R. You've got inference, and you've got minimization, which are all concepts around privacy of the data. And it goes into detail on those, explaining how they relate to GDPR and to the CCPA, I think it is, well, there are two Californian standards that it references. It also covers some aspects of GDPR, or rather what the European Union or European Commission were looking at in relation to artificial intelligence. Now, when the book was being written, there wasn't yet the AI Act for Europe, but it still covered some of these aspects in the inference section of the book. And I think there's also some information on HIPAA, which is for health information.
Fantastic. So where can people get the book?
They can, it's available digitally on Pact Publishing. It's available on Amazon, both in print and digitally. Hopefully from yourselves. And there's also the possibility for a giveaway, but I'll let Simon cover that.
That's right, it's competition time. We're offering one digital copy and one printed copy of Brett's book, Threat Modelling Gameplay with EoP, courtesy of Pact Publishing. This is what you have to do to win your copy. Tell us, why would you like a copy of Brett's book? Is there something you want to learn? What problem are you looking to solve? Tell us and your friends about it on LinkedIn and at us here at Agile Stationery and Pact Publishing, so we don't miss it. Good luck.
So, closing thoughts. It's been great talking to you. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
The more people start threat modeling, the better, and let's try and make software a bit more secure.
Fabulous. Absolutely 100% behind that sentiment. So thank you, Brett, for a great session. I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing those contributions on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, everyone.